right, welcome into Surviving Paradise, the podcast that takes a sometimes serious, oftentimes humorous look at the claim by Jehovah's Witnesses that they are living in a modern-day spiritual paradise. I am your host, Stacy Bauman, former elder, ministerial servant, most importantly, a kid raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses during that unique time period known as the 70s and 80s. Thanks for being here. As I do, just a little bit of a warning. It is a journey in and out of Jehovah's Witnesses, and there may be some things that trigger some people. We try to have some fun here, try to heal. Each episode has sarcasm, humor, and my own set of observations, I guess is the best way to say it, and it's never meant to offend. Appreciate you being here. If you happen to be a Jehovah's Witness, please stay. Please stay. I'm traveling this week and enjoying a single origin coffee from Indonesia. And I got to thinking during my travels about several things. And I guess in a lot of ways it was revisiting several things. And I wanted to ask, what drew you to Jehovah's Witnesses? And I fully realize, as is the case with myself, that many of us were born in or raised from a very young age inside the organization. Some may have come into contact with the Witnesses later in life. But even for those of us that were born in, what did you personally actually love or hope for by being a Jehovah's Witness? And listen, scrap the obvious. Scrap it. We all wanted six-pack abs and to live forever on a paradise earth with a hot spouse, making babies and eating kiwi for dinner. Okay? That's not what I'm talking about. Throw that out. Go a little deeper. I'm talking about what we wanted or longed for at the instant gratification level, I guess is the best way to describe it. At the heart level. So at the heart level, what was it that attracted you and kept you a Jehovah's Witness? And listen, where I can communicate during my travels on DMs, social media, YouTube, I'm looking forward to the answers to that. I'm going to share what it was for me. And it sounds simplistic, and in many ways it is, but in many ways it's not. For me, it was the sense that someone cared. I have stated I was a fatherless boy, and I really struggled at times with how I saw the world and everyone in it. But being a member of Jehovah's Witnesses did give me a sense that somebody cared about me, a sense of community. Somebody was looking after me. What drew me and kept me there was the sense that we were part of something honorable, something special, that we truly cared about each other and everybody else as well. We loved our neighbor. And yes, there was the inflated view that we knew the truth and in some ways had something over on the rest of the planet. That plays a role in there somewhere. But in the end, I grew up believing that we had a caring community, despite the fact that you would often see love for each other missing in a congregation. I've covered that on past episodes and a subject for another day. Most Jehovah's Witnesses I grew up with or was close to in my time as a witness had shared with me that they felt the same way. There was a sense of community, a sense that someone cared about them, genuinely cared about them. Even through the misery, the fear of discipline, and missing out on all the other normal things in life that we laugh at and cover here, there was still this underlying feeling in your heart. I guess that's the best way I can describe it, that the people in my local congregation, and by extension the worldwide brotherhood, including world headquarters, really, really cared about us. It filled a void for me. It gave us a sense of community. And for us old-timers, you remember the messaging that we could go anywhere in the world and meet a fellow Jehovah's Witness, and next thing you know, they're having you in for dinner and you're sleeping in the second bedroom. Everyone cared. You could always rely on one another. So for me, by extension, everything that kept me in the organization built off what came to be a false feeling. A false feeling that everyone cared, especially reflecting on the shepherds and their bosses back in New York. I was always drawn to that piece of Jehovah's Witnesses. I was drawn to Bible stories that highlighted it and equally loved the publications that seemed to put an emphasis on love, caring, and community. You might remember, for us old timers here, the Draw Close to Jehovah book and the Greatest Man book. I really liked those books at those time. And even when I tossed all my literature, those are the two I saved. Isn't that interesting? I wish I'd saved it all, but when I left, I left. When choosing public talk outlines, I'm even thinking along those lines. I was drawn to subjects like brotherly love and caring for widows and orphans, all phrases that a Jehovah's Witness listening will recognize. And I'll tell you, there was this brief period of time in the organization where things seemed to get a little warm and fuzzy, at least for a brief time. Sort of the 90s, sort of the early 2000s. Don't know who was taking the lead in writing some of the literature back there, but it got a little fuzzier. And as you know, it didn't last. It didn't take long. And then again, there's the Bible. The Bible is filled with hundreds of verses showing that Jehovah really, truly cares about each of us individually. I would literally take those verses and those chapters and those stories and those illustrations, and I would build my local needs parts based on some of them. I want to give you an example, a simple one. And of course, this proves, if you're looking at the Holy Book, exactly how the God of the Bible and his son Jesus feel about people. At Ezekiel 34:11, it said, quote, "I myself will search for my sheep and I will care for them." End quote. And who could forget this one? 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7, quote, and I went to this many times. I'm sure people that suffer from depression, anxiety, and worry lean into this one. 1 Peter 5, 6, and 7, quote, "Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that he may exalt you in due time, while you throw all your anxiety upon him, because he cares for you." End quote. And so I got the feeling at a young age that someone cared. It seems simple. I got the message. Love and being cared for starts at the top with Jehovah, his son, and his organization. An organization that claims to be the most loving and happiest group of people on the earth. It's in print. The illusion that Jehovah's Witnesses were a loving, caring organization lasted a few decades for me, but then the cracks started to show as I matured, got older, and developed critical thinking ability. I lost my naivety, and I'd love to have it back. And I could no longer, as time went on, ignore the neglect, the unkindness, the fear tactics, or that the faces were disappearing due to being disfellowshipped. People were literally dying to remain faithful to doctrines I couldn't explain to them, nor could they explain to anyone else. As an elder, the shepherding calls became overwhelming at the end. I was drowning in toxic marriages and trying to keep teenagers desperately in the organization. And it was during this time period that I began to question a lot of things. And one of the main questions was this: does the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses even care about Jehovah's Witnesses? It seems simple, but that was the question in my mind. Do these guys even really care about us? Based on the experiences, the conversations, the desperation, everything that I was seeing and trying to fix? As should be the case, I started to take a closer look at the guys at the top. The guys I was told were shepherds, that Jesus had handpicked them, that take baths in Holy Spirit, and soon they'd be going to heaven to sit right next to Jesus. These guys were special. When I looked at them closely, including one of whom I somewhat knew, I didn't like what I found. And listen, I tossed out human perfection and past guys and all that stuff, and I looked at what was happening then in real time. And listen, I fully recognize this. I get comments and DMs on this. I'm a little intense. Some have called me dramatic. Okay, guilty. I'll take it. But I went all the way back to New York in person several times. That's how desperate I was to get answers. Do these guys care? I want to know. And listen, I was thorough. It turns out that none of the travel was necessary, but let me tell you, it was very entertaining. There was nothing like going to Pittsburgh and leaning on Chuck Russell's pyramid. That was a good time. Truly one of the top 3 times I've laughed the hardest in my life. I literally almost threw up from laughing. There was nothing like watching Dan Sidlick stare up at the sky when he didn't know I was watching him one day in Brooklyn, Bethel. There was nothing like the stories I got from Guy Pearce, who at one point was a circuit overseer, then became a governing body member. But none of those things ended up being necessary to reach what was an undeniable conclusion for me personally. The governing body doesn't care about the common Jehovah's Witness. I laugh because I might cry. They don't care. And I'll tell you, that's a bold statement to make from just some guy with a microphone turned on. But I truly believe the governing body doesn't care about the common Jehovah's Witness. Outside of their financial donations, turning in a little time slip that contributes to their numbers on the annual report, I couldn't personally find evidence that those guys in New York cared about Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, you may be saying, come on, man. How did you come to that conclusion that they just don't care? Well, if you're curious how I came to that conclusion, I'd like to share it. For me personally, there were primarily 3 reasons, 3 things, and I've thought a lot about this week, that jumped out at me that I believe shows that the governing body could care less about the common Jehovah's Witness. The kid, the teenager, the single mom, the widow, the guy, anybody in any local congregation. It was these 3 reasons that, I got to be candid with you, knocked me out. And I'm sure everybody has their own reasons. I'm sure if I polled anybody who might listen or a former Jehovah's Witness, they'd say, well, here's my 3 reasons, and which fascinates me. I love hearing that stuff. But when I personally went to examine the leaders, it turned ugly quickly for this one-time elder. It just got ugly. But we can't go any further without sharing how they feel and what their claim is about Jehovah's Witnesses in their own words. In the 2016 yearbook, remember those? They're now gone. Isn't that odd? The 2016 yearbook of Jehovah's Witnesses, under the letter from the governing body at the front of the book, says, quote, Jehovah has blessed his people during the past service year. What more can we expect? We shall have to wait and see. In the meantime, please know that we on the governing body love all of you very much, and we pray often in your behalf. End quote. Even rereading that, I had this overwhelming feeling that just said, thanks, fellas. Even if I'm only averaging 2 hours in service a month, I'm asking for a friend. Scratch that. Make it, I'm asking for several thousand friends. If you know, you know. But I think it's important to note that the governing body goes out of their way to tell Jehovah's Witnesses that they love them, that they care for them. They've even recently sort of ramped this up in some of the videos and conventions. They want to remind them of this in the literature and on the JW broadcasting. They point to all the books and the magazines they make for them, or how they use the money you and I donated, not their own, the money we gave them to help other publishers in a faraway land repair their homes post-hurricane. That is apparently supposed to be evidence of their love and care. Wait, you took my money and gave it to them? I could have gave it to them. What did you give to them? Oh, the irony. They tell them it's a privilege to serve in any capacity in the congregation, building things for them or standing next to a book cart and handing out their books. All of this in their minds amounts to the governing body caring for Jehovah's sheep. And they contrast how much they care with everyone else in the world who doesn't. I have to work in a story that I used in one of my public talks for many years, and it's just one I've never forgotten, and I have to work it in here because it's such a contrast on how they think. It comes to us from the Watchtower of 1999, September 15th, pages 2 through 4, under the article, Does Anyone Really Care? How appropriate for this discussion. Under the subheading, A Need for Someone to Care, indeed, we get this, quote, there surely is a need for someone to care. For example, think about the lonely man in Germany who was found sitting in front of his television set 5 years after his death at Christmas. This divorced, disabled loner, embittered by his sad experiences in life, was not missed until the bank account that paid his rent was exhausted. No one really cared about him. End quote. First, that reference has been saved in my head because it's so wrong on so many levels. They probably didn't realize he was a disfellowship. No, never mind. I read this and I was stuck with the irony that they tell people Jehovah cares so much that he sends angels to guide them to specific doors, to hand them specific Watchtower magazines, and usher them into a future paradise. But apparently not this guy? Apparently he was only as good as an example of how no one cared about him. And I work it in there because in one little snapshot, in one look at one experience and one example, I think you capture the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses. This guy's good for an example of how no one cares without them seeing the irony that includes them. That includes them. This guy wasn't even worthy of an angelic visit or a couple of publishers handing him a magazine. But I digress. Let me get back to what I think are the 3 things that prove to me that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses does not truly, at the heart level, care about the millions of people they claim to be serving, and by extension, the billions of people they claim to be saving. I want to start with number 1, and I got to tell you, you're going to recognize this, and I'm going to skim it. There isn't any amount of time that could do it justice. I'm hitting it early because it's disgusting, it's repulsive, and it defies anything that I can even say about it. But I'm going to give it a shot for a few minutes. And if you're a Jehovah's Witness listening, I have to ask you as respectfully as possible, how are you ignoring this? If you're aware, how are you ignoring this? The number one reason I truly believe that the governing body could care less about people is coming at you. So brace yourselves. Now, listen, and I guess I'm going to insert a disclaimer here. I've come to realize that many, if not most of Jehovah's Witnesses aren't even aware that this is going on in the organization. I don't know how, but I've learned it. See a past episode of this show about the chosen path of ignorance. It's one of my favorites. But for those folks that aren't aware, they're on the hamster wheel of meetings, service, book carts. The reality is this. Many Jehovah's Witnesses are either ignoring what I'm about to say or choose not to look at it any deeper. But none of that excuses that it's going on in God's chosen organization. At the risk of turning this into your standard local needs part of public talk, a Jehovah's Witness spends their life learning that Jesus is all things love, but that he has a special love for children. And so, my number one reason is that the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses is blatantly protecting financial assets over protecting children. And there is simply no explanation for this. There is nothing anyone can say that makes this okay, nor erases it from this conversation. A conversation that I boldly claim points at the governing body as uncaring people. But back to Jesus. On what such occasion he showed how much he cared about children. Now remember, Jesus, for those who might be new to this concept, is the king of Jehovah's Witnesses. He's listening in on the podcast today. And I got a few questions. At Mark chapter 10, he takes a little guy, a little person in his arms, and he tells his apostles to become more like children, like this little guy. And the governing body knows this. They can see how much God's Son loves children. how he puts them on a pedestal. He thinks they're special. He points at them for his apostles to be more like them. The same governing body that throws children to the wolves in order to protect the organization. From the governing body's book, Come Be My Follower, chapter 14, pages 139 through 149, under the chapter, Large Crowds Approached Him, the governing body reiterates and shares this, quote, he says, "Let the young children come to me. Do not try to stop them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such ones. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a young child will by no means enter into it." Then Jesus takes the children into his arms, blessing them. You can see it all at Mark 10. The quote continues, Mark's language here suggests that Jesus affectionately embraces them, perhaps even cradling some infants in the crook of his arm, as one translator puts it. Clearly, Jesus is fond of children. End quote. The Jesus we come to know via the New World Translation, let's start there so everyone's comfortable, clearly loves kids. In fact, he says the kingdom of God, dare I say his earthly organization in 2023, belongs to them, the kids. Let that sink in. It's one of many examples where Jesus speaks about how important children are to him. Now, when we compare the king with his chosen 9 guys in upstate New York, what do we find? The organization, his kingdom, belongs to kids. And I don't want to hear about Caleb and Sophia videos or books made for kids or youth books or anything else. What I want to know is if the guys chosen by Jesus to lead me and my kids into a paradise earth, the same kingdom Jesus says belongs to these kids, I want to know if the 9 guys in New York even like my kids. And I have to ask, what is their conduct and their current set of standards and their legal department and everything else? What evidence does it show us? They make some pretty bold claims about how they feel about kids. In the publication, How to Remain in God's Love, pages 243, 244, under the section number 14, the governing body, we get this, quote, "The governing body is the group of men with the heavenly hope who are used by God to direct the work of his people. Today, the group of brothers who serve as the governing body take the lead in directing, guiding, and protecting God's people." End quote. The first question that jumps to mind is, who is protecting us from you? They make the claim that they protect God's people. I've given you one quick snapshot from the Bible and their own publications about how the kingdom of God belongs to children. Jesus loves children. We should all be more like children. And what do we find? I'm sure we're all remembering in this instant the great future king, Stephen Lett, telling us that our kings are actually enemies of God. Doesn't jive with what Jesus said. He said the kingdom remains. What? The kingdom belongs to them? Nope. Stephen says they're enemies. He's never going to live that down. But why would anyone be surprised? When I went to examine if the governing body cares, this is the one that jumps out at me at 2023. And listen, I was an elder. I've dealt with this, and I taught the other elders at elder school on how to handle child abuse situations. I was assigned by Brooklyn Bethel at the time. I could sit here and I could share endless statistics and experiences, but you know by now that for me personally, when I discuss such a heinous, unbelievable subject, I immediately go to the nuance or the motive behind it all. I'm much more interested in the unspoken dynamics that we as people seem to take for granted in favor of analytics. I don't care about your analytics. So before I show you their gross, and I mean gross lack of care, I'll drop just a few facts in here in order to make a much bigger point. A point that provides insight into why this is one of the 3 things that had a massive impact on this guy walking out. Here are a few facts regarding children that should catch the attention of any Jehovah's Witness, and most especially a parent. Quote, cases of alleged abuse are reported to secular authorities, if required by local laws or as instructed by the local branch office. Forgive me. This is from their website, the Public Announcement Department. This is a quote. Back to the quote. A 2002 press release from Jehovah's Witnesses Office of Public Information states, quote, in addition to making a report to the branch office, the elders may be required by law to report even uncorroborated or unsubstantiated allegations to the authorities. If so, the elders receive proper legal direction to ensure that they comply with the law. End quote. You might remember in Mark chapter 10, the apostles were telling the kids to get lost. Jesus whipped out his cell phone and made a quick call to the legal department to make sure it was okay to take the kids in his arms and take care of them and protect them. Oh, that was left out? Sarcasm mine. This announcement should disturb anyone associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. The key words in that were if and may. Thousands of babies have been damaged beyond what words could express, and millions of dollars have been spent by the 9 guys in upstate New York to get victims to go away and shut up, with even more money spent to spin this entire disaster in their publications and videos. And again, I'm at risk at making this whole episode about the first reason that I went for the exit door. But I'm going to try to keep it brief. The most infamous example of all of this came out with Australia when they decided they'd had enough. The Australian Royal Commission went after them. And they even got the governing body, King Jackson, on the stand, where he sat there lying. He lied repeatedly. If you're a Jehovah's Witness and haven't watched this, it is an apostate literature. It's a secular court. And King Jackson was surrounded by fellow elders and Australian branch leadership who embarrassed themselves over and over again, proving what I say about elders and witnesses all the time. Most of them don't study. They can't even express or convey or teach their own doctrines. But I don't want to bog this down in the details of the policy or the misuse of the long-dead Mosaic law or the horrific crushed hearts left in their wake. The only question I was left with after watching that particular proceeding was this. Do the governing body care about Jehovah's Witnesses? Do they care about children? Are we to believe that the same Jesus of Mark chapter 10 is watching on the Australian Royal Commission and many just like it, and he approves of all of this? Are we to believe that? If you're a Jehovah's Witness, do you believe that? Because in Mark 10, he scolds the apostles for not letting kids come in for a hug. But now he gives Stephen Lett and the guys in New York a pat on the back for this? In the Watchtower of 1998, November 1st, pages 30 through 31, under the article, Jesus Spent Time with Children, we get more. Quote, Jesus saw admirable qualities in children. They are usually inquisitive and trustful. They will accept their parents' words and even defend them before other children. Their receptive, teachable nature is worthy of imitation by all who wish to enter God's kingdom. As Jesus stated, the kingdom of God belongs to such like ones. But Jesus was not simply using these children for the sake of an illustration. The account makes it clear that Jesus genuinely loved being around them. Mark reports that Jesus took the children into his arms and began blessing them, laying his hands upon them. End quote. It seems apparent. The kingdom belongs to them. The same kingdom that the 9 guys in New York, the governing body who have taken an oath to protect and love them and care for them, don't seem to realize. Kids aren't just a subject for illustrations by Jesus at Mark 10. When reading his book to mankind, he was sure to include how he cares for children. And if you're like me, I can't bring these two things together and never could. When I desperately needed to know that the governing body cared about Jehovah's Witnesses, and especially the little people, the real life experiences I was having when compared to the magic book, how do I say this? They don't come together. They don't complement each other. In the end, I'm not asking if Jesus cares for children. Remember, my question isn't analytical. It's emotional. What I'm asking is if the 2023 governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses cares for children. When asked many times, Stacy, how could this be happening? How could this be happening? The answer is obvious. And there is really nothing a Jehovah's Witness or anyone even that's pained by this can say to make it go away. The legal department of this organization is the fastest growing department at Jesus' upstate New York resort. And in reality, this all goes away, all the harm and devastation to children, because they're protecting that. They're protecting their assets. They're protecting their money. Children be damned if it puts the organization's financial empire at risk. As painful as it is to hear, folks, that's the answer. That's the answer. It's an unbelievable, shocking, number one reason that I say the governing body doesn't care about Jehovah's Witnesses. How can you not care about children? Jesus scolded his apostles for just keeping children out of range from a hug. We're now supposed to believe that Jesus thinks it's okay for children to be abused in ways I can't even say into open air, and it's all swept under the rug. You even have a secret list of guys somewhere that do this? But he scolded the apostles and told them the kingdom belongs to them. The organization of Jehovah's Witnesses does not belong to children. And they don't care about them. And because I can't beat this drum enough, one final point before I move on to the other two for everyone listening. And I want you to realize something when I say this. And yes, I want what I'm about to tell you to sound ominous. Here's Stacy being dramatic. I want what I'm about to tell you to spark conversation. I want someone to care. From the Shepherd, the Flock of God book, chapter 21, section Incidents. The shepherds appointed to care for you and I and our children are given this instruction from the governing body regarding Kingdom Hall buildings. Quote, when property damage occurs, quick action can go far in preventing further damage. Break-in, thefts, arson, or other incidents of vandalism should be promptly reported to the local authorities. The local design construction department maintenance trainer may be contacted for direction, end quote. Did you catch it? When it comes to the precious, lovable children of Jehovah's Witnesses, if you can prove they were abused, you may call the authorities depending on the local laws. But don't mess with their real estate. Should someone hurt their investment, their buildings, elders are directed to, quote, promptly report it to the local authorities. Does the governing body care about children? Their safety? Their little hearts? There's no way around it. It looks like our kids are an option. You may if you have to. But don't mess with their property. Promptly report that. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. Moving along before I go super sideways. On my journey out the exit door, I had a second set of facts that I just couldn't ignore any longer. They bothered me for so long in my journey as a witness, and I just couldn't do it anymore. And that was in my number 2 reason the governing body could care less. The number 2 reason was the long history featuring a long list of unnecessary death, misery, and hypocrisy. Where do I begin? Life is so precious. When I put the only religion I'd ever been in my life under the microscope, this particular subject made me sick. I often ask myself, why are the governing bodies so cavalier with human life? Now listen, these are my thoughts. Maybe you disagree, maybe you've had different ones or they're similar. But consider a few examples that impacted me. I'm going to start first with blood. I've yet to tackle the subject of blood on this crazy little show, but I'm going to cover it in the future. It's a worthy mention, at least at this point, on how little the governing body cares about Jehovah's Witnesses. I'll keep this one example fairly brief because it deserves multiple episodes, more in-depth discussion, and there's far greater people out there that have left and have educated us on this. It deserves so much more because it really truly is a concrete proof that the governing body doesn't care about Jehovah's Witnesses. And as an example, I encourage you to sit down for this one. If you're not in the know, this is, and again, sorry, I get emotional and I get distracted myself. Back to the point, blood. At one point, believe it or not, blood transfusions were actually encouraged in God's organization. And you were actually compared to a Pharisee if you discouraged or you refused to get one. You heard that correctly. Hit rewind. That's not a misstatement. From the Consolation of September 16th, 1945, it's now the Awake magazine. The Dutch edition featured this nugget of Holy Spirit, where it criticized prohibition of blood transfusion as actually being a lack of mercy and love. It says this, quote, "When we lose our life because we refuse inoculations, that does not bear witness as a justification of Jehovah's name. God never issued regulations which prohibit the use of drugs, inoculations, or blood transfusions. It is an invention of people who, like the Pharisees, leave Jehovah's mercy and love aside." End quote. Times have changed. And it highlights the gross cruelty, much less anything defined as care or well-being, that the current governing body has for Jehovah's Witnesses. Blood transfusions were mostly a conscious matter up through the 1950s, because Jehovah and his son forgot to mention blood was so special for several centuries. It slipped their minds. Oh, I'm getting to new light, hold tight. So they had a Watchtower article written to mankind to let them know that they would now be shunning them if they even considered a blood transfusion. You can read that momentous New Light occasion in the Watchtower of January 15th, 1961, pages 63 through 64. And look, what's been the result? At one point, you were a Pharisee if you refused a blood transfusion. In 61, Jehovah and Jesus got together and said, I think we should completely change this, and told people they would be kicked out of their kingdom and organization for getting one. The results. I refer to this without any way to corroborate it, but in a study by Dr. Osamu Muramoto, you can find it online, it's estimated that approximately 594 Jehovah's Witnesses die every year as a result of not being allowed a blood transfusion. It was estimated that by 2016, when he did the study, more than 30,000 Jehovah's Witnesses had died since 1961, when suddenly Jehovah and Jesus outlawed blood transfusions, and you could get disfellowshipped for saving your own life. The governing body's concern, protection, and care for Jesus' precious sheep has resulted in unnecessary death. And I got no words. And I couldn't shake this. And it's reason number 2 that I don't think they care. Deserves more. But when considering death, misery, mayhem that the governing body allows, and look, I'm going to say it, even somewhat encourages, and certainly holds people over the fire, letting them know that if they make a decision to save their own life in certain situations, they're going to be disfellowshipped anyway, and their life will basically end with all they know. Sorry, exhausted already. It doesn't stop with just blood. How about a brief look at persecution, war, and more? We've covered those subjects on this show before. When you look at war and the fascinating subject of martyrdom, and how they put this on a pedestal, and there's so many terms attached to this, and they've ramped this up in recent years with full-blown videos now showing people giving it all they got for an organization that pumps out books and magazines. It's just unbelievably shocking that people overlook this. And you can look back at the entire history of how many witnesses have paid with their lives. You look back at the big ones, the headlines. Jehovah's Witnesses suffered persecution in Nazi Germany between 33 and 45. It's estimated that upwards of 5,000 witnesses may have died in captivity, with many pointed to by the governing body as martyrs, with their memories relegated to Watchtower articles or Proclaimer books or Purple Triangle videos. Then there's Malawi in 67. Thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses in Malawi were beaten, and I can't even say the words with the female, killed by police for refusing to purchase a card indicating they endorsed the Malawi Congress Party. That's right, carrying a paper card that meant nothing in the grand scheme of things would have just saved their lives. Kind of like our driver's license or our auto insurance card. And before you dismiss that and say, well, man, it was neutrality, they were allowing brothers facing the same type of persecution in Mexico to carry a card. What? Wasn't good for Africa, but it's good for Mexico? Thousands of people gave their lives. While the rest of us in the 70s, me included as a kid, were writing letters to the African government begging them to be nice to our brothers and sisters in Malawi. Time doesn't permit me to go into Russia, India, Cuba. The list is long. Jehovah's Witnesses have been persecuted. There's prison sentences for all sorts of things, practices ranging from not saluting a flag to claiming their spiritual paradise was better than their local government. And it's still going on today in countries around the world. While the governing body and their Rolexes and their fancy TV studio sit in upstate New York and tell them good job with a clap and a new letter. Before you dismiss this as proof that the governing body doesn't care about their people, I want to say I don't consider moving videos or Watchtower articles saying they love these wonderful, innocent people as proof that they care. I just don't accept that. I had to go deeper. And all I could sit with was the senseless deaths of people bought into teachings that could change at any given moment anyway. And for me, there was something that jumped out at me on this subject of martyrdom, death, misery, persecution, blood, all of that stuff in this big giant bucket of unbelievable pain. There was one thing that jumped out at me. I want to ask you if you've ever noticed something. Have you ever noticed that not a single member of the governing body has ever given their life for this organization? Not one. And let me tell you, I did note that. Their king did. The apostles did. But they don't. So when I look at the scoreboard, I got Jesus 1, governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses 0. While thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses die. Game over. But when I was asking myself if those guys in New York care, and I put all the death and misery under the microscope, there were things closer to home that bothered me on this subject as well. Things like, have you ever been to a Jehovah's Witness memorial or funeral? Ever been to one? I can tell you I gave the talk, and I didn't like myself for it. I'm going to be honest. I didn't like myself for it. I'm welling up talking about it. At an event where people are in tremendous pain and where we should be celebrating a wonderful 1 in 400 trillion chance person, we're giving a talk that serves as an infomercial for why you should be a Jehovah's Witness. It's so shocking. Does the governing body care? In an old outline I have, it includes instructions like this from those guys in New York. Quote, instead of eulogizing the deceased, use the material in this outline to give a fine witness concerning the truth. What? And then there's this in the instructions. Quote, doctrinal points can be presented as beliefs of the deceased, which served as motivation for him. End quote. It's an infomercial. Did you care about this person at all? I'm not concerned with giving a good witness at the moment. And then there's this whole matter of John chapter 11 for me when it comes to funerals and someone who's passed. I'm fairly familiar with how Jesus, despite the fact that he knew he was about to resurrect him anyway and he'd be right back, how Jesus reacted when Lazarus' sisters told him he'd been dead for 4 days. Jesus was distraught. The Watchtower has pictures of him bawling his eyes out. There's really no record of Jesus saying, hey, I'm going to go wake him up because he believed in me and he knew if he didn't land in heaven, he would land on a paradise earth. Anyone watching, see me for a free home Bible study. It's not there, but it isn't a Jehovah's Witness funeral. Precious souls that the governing body should care about, be interested in intimately. Jesus was. What's going on with your 9 kings in New York? Having given this talk for people deeply loved by their family, I just came away empty. Why weren't we celebrating the person more? Why weren't people allowed to speak and share memories? What did we actually do for the bereaving family? None of it sat well with me. And I'll tell you, my very last one, I said the prayer, I turned to my left and I walked off the left side of the stage, straight down the aisle and out the exit door on the left and drove away bawling. I didn't stop for one person. The whole thing bothered me so badly. And I know I'm not alone if there's any former elders listening or out there. The funeral arrangement, something as innocuous as a local congregation tragedy, much less the tragedies of persecution, blood transfusions, and everything else, were proof to me that the governing body doesn't care. But finally, in the interest of time, I'm only going to drop this here for a future conversation. When it comes to proving the governing body just doesn't care about most Jehovah's Witnesses, I give you their handling of something so painful I can barely say it, and I'm going to move on from it. Take a look at the Jehovah's Witness teaching, belief, all of it surrounding suicide and how those precious people are treated. I'm going to move on. I got to be in the right frame of mind for that subject, but it falls in this bucket. Do they care? And with that, I'm on to my third reason, in the interest of time, that I don't believe the governing body truly cares about Jehovah's Witnesses, and by extension, really nobody. I'm just going to say it. Clearly, I'm in a mood. And that third reason I have to tell you, in my time in and my time out, it seemed kind of unique to my crazy brain. Most people I talk to just have never put any thought to it. I'd love to hear from you. The third reason is this: when that new light miraculously arrives, the governing body and the organization do absolutely nothing, zero, nada, to revisit and save those people that rejected the old light, the original teaching. They do nothing to correct it. In my opinion, this fact is completely overlooked and ignored by most Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's one that proves to me, without a shadow of a doubt, that they don't care about people at all. If you want to accept that Jehovah and Jesus like to keep secrets and watch people suffer for decades while they keep their secret, including secrets like, hey, you can live forever on a paradise earth, that secret they unveiled in 1935 at a convention, or comically insulting revelations such as generations overlap, or that people make life-altering decisions, some of which led to death of innocent people, like, I don't know, new lights on blood, neutrality, organ transplants. Or maybe you say that's too serious. How about just a lifetime of misery based on new light that led to divorces, lack of retirement, no education, poverty, etc.? Well then, if you want to sit in that, that is your right. Jehovah and Jesus keep secrets till the right time. I'm not going to spend time trying to convince someone that the Jehovah and Jesus in their own Bible claim that they never change, see a past episode, or not to go beyond what they've written, or that any additions to this book leads to death and plagues, nor am I going to try to explain to an apologist listening that when you claim new light, you clearly never considered it can't be new because it was never light to begin with. It was just wrong. I'm not going there today. You can't get something new out of something that never was. You can see a past episode on what is the most entertaining of all Jehovah's Witness subjects, at least to me. No, I'm not going there today. I'm going to take this a different direction and side with the Jehovah's Witnesses out there. This whole new light thing must be true because, well, the governing body says so. And I'm going to work with that, okay? I'm jumping off a different platform here. I'm going to play along to prove my point that they don't care. New light is real, and it's always happening. So pick any subject you want here because there has been a lot of new light in the past century. What are your favorites? Do you have one or two that heavily impacted your life? There are so many to choose from. If I didn't know better, I would bet that Jehovah and Jesus actually love Christmas and birthdays because I love how they hand out new presents in the form of new light every so often. They're secret keepers, and then they hand out a present. Let me see here. Here's some of my favorites just off the top of my head. There was Chuck Russell out in Egypt with a ruler measuring pyramid steps, telling us when the end of the world would come. It didn't come. Must have had a bad ruler. No big deal. How about what Jehovah did with vaccines? Imagine you needed a vaccine in 1951 in order to keep alive, but you died because you were told getting a vaccine was a sin. But wait! New light incoming. Jehovah approved vaccines and inoculations in 1952, just a few months after you died. Tough break for you, huh? There's some new light. But how about a final new light example? And I'm choosing this one to make a point. You're a longtime Jehovah's Witness alive in 2006, and you've always wanted to see heaven, and who wouldn't? And you believe that's your final destination. But no. The governing body told us that Jesus shut the door to heaven in 1935. Well, you just can't accept that. You don't believe it. So you leave Jehovah's Witnesses in this organization. You leave God's kingdom because what they're telling you can't be right. Wow, you terrible apostate. You have a terrible attitude. wait a minute. It's incoming. That's right. In 2007, just months after you leave God's organization, new light. I've always loved how Jesus gave us new light as well. This time he chose to give us new light that would alter the entire universe in the back of a watchtower in a little thing called Questions from the Readers. Here comes some new light. The Watchtower, May 1st, 2007, months after you've left because you want to go to heaven and they say you can't. May 1st, 2000, page 30 through 31 says this, quote, it's just a one-sentence new light. Thus, it appears that we cannot set a specific date for when the calling of Christians to the heavenly hope ends, end quote. Wait a minute. Jehovah and Jesus have been sitting on this, huh? In 1935, you said everyone had to go and live in a paradise earth eating fruit baskets with their pets. Nope. They slide in new light in a question from the readers, usually page 31 in the back of a Watchtower magazine, and I love how they worded it. Thus, it appears... Oh, really? Are we getting an apology? No. It appears that we cannot set a specific date for when the calling of Christians to the hope... Okay. Did you know what they said there, too? We cannot set a specific date in that quote. But wait, you did set a specific date. You told us in 1935 the door shut. We believed this for going on a century. And well, I left the organization in 2006, as did thousands of others, because, we can read the Bible too, and we knew you were wrong that Jesus only talks about heaven. I was heaven-bound. And Jesus would tell you that you were wrong in 2007, huh? New light. And well, there it is, folks. As if the two weren't enough to convince you, my third and most comical proof in my own mind is that the governing body could give a rat's ass about anyone on this planet, much less Jehovah's Witnesses. And something I contemplated for many, many years in silence is the following. I gave you that there's new light. I'm with you. New light exists. For some odd reason, Jehovah and Jesus keep secrets, and then they spring them on us only after people have left or people have decided the governing body is incorrect. But here, and I want to emphasize this, here is where the proof is in the pudding for me, that the governing body not only doesn't care, see a past episode on New Light. If new light is real, and we have a new understanding, what are they doing to return to every single precious hair is numbered on their head, leaving the 99 sheep to track down the one soul that we witnessed to at their door and gave old light to? What are they doing to correct that precious person's understanding so they can join us in paradise or heaven for a fruit bowl and a ride on my pet camel? What are they doing to correct it and update people who got old information? And if you think what I'm saying is absurd, walk with me for a moment. Walk with me. I know my brain is a scary place. I'm aware of that. I'll give you that. But walk with me. If you think that it's unreasonable that when new light arrives, that they shouldn't be going out and updating every precious soul that got the old light with the new information to save their life, walk with me. Here we go. Illustration. I got a G on this one. If Jesus walks into Jerusalem and tells the Jews, hey, the Romans are going to wipe you out in 80 AD. And then he bolts and returns to heaven. But, you guessed it, new light. He now knows that the Romans are going to arrive at the city that he holds dear to his heart in actually 70 AD, 10 years earlier than he told the Jews. Does Jesus not return to warn every single person who listened to him? From a woman at the well, to a crippled kid, to a tax collector, I don't know, to his own damn apostles, and, correct their understanding? Because, well, if you're a Jew paying no attention and you're having a backyard barbecue, no pork, in 69 AD, thinking they have 11 years before Russell Crowe, the gladiator, shows up, but he shows up 10 years earlier, aren't people going to die? Jesus told us 80, new light, it happened in 70. Does Jesus just do his best 2023 governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses impression and just say, hey, new light, oops, sorry, I told you 80 AD, but well, things change. Oops, sorry folks, made decisions and were caught off guard, and well, sorry about the people that died. If you're a Jehovah's Witness apologist listening, this is undeniable stuff. Look, my illustration is me. I'm a nut job. We are going to cave and give you the new light thing. But that doesn't explain how you told that person at the door one thing. They made a life-altering decision based on what you told them as a representative of Jehovah. It then changed, and they're left twisting in the wind. Scratch that. They're now going to be bird food at Armageddon. Based on what you told them? You made no effort to go back and update this information to the precious soul that you exist to save? Houston, we have a problem. And it was a problem I couldn't deny, and it was one of these three reasons that made me really firmly realize the governing body could care less. If you claim you're God's mouthpiece to mankind, you give false information in 1985, but then do nothing to correct it, aren't you blood guilty when that same person gets swallowed by an earthquake at Armageddon? And listen in. Oh, the irony. The same guys that were handing out the old light are the same guys that not only misled you and never fixed it by updating you with new light, but they're the same guys that are now going to kill you. Hey, here's a guarantee. Oh, we changed that a few years later. Tough break, you missed it. Here, eat a fireball. What? Does the governing body care? Friends, there's no way around this stuff. None. Try it. I spent decades dwelling on it, as you can tell. Does the governing body care about you? Do they care about your family, your neighbors? Giving bad info, not correcting it, then being the executioner? Some people would see this as a real problem. It's unbelievable. And ladies and gentlemen, that was it for me. From elder, 8-year watchtower study conductor, book study conductor, and more, to the guy going out the exit. There is simply no excuse for this stuff. When you claim that you're doing a life-saving work, none. I told my kid it was okay to play with fire, but new light, he can't. It will burn him. I'm not going to tell him. Let him figure it out on his own. And with that, I'm out. I'll give you the new light thing. I don't believe it. It's absurd. But I'm going to play. I'm going to pretend for those that believe it. I'm going to give it to you. New light. It's coming. What is the governing body doing to show they care about every single person that got old light, made a decision based on the old light, and fixing it? What are they doing? Their sole existence on this planet is to save mankind from doom. Otherwise, they'd be in heaven with Jesus. I don't know, playing harps. I don't know what they're doing. But they've handed you ever-changing instructions on how to survive Armageddon, how to do that. There's no effort to fix old light. No tract campaigns, no magazines, no JW broadcasting episodes, no book carts at your local bus stop saying, oops, we were sorry, we got that wrong, here's new light. They don't even do that. But they're here to help and save us? This work is so important that Judge Joe had kids in service 6 hours a day at one point. And a few weeks ago, I covered the original Pioneer hour requirements that were in the Watchtower. 175 hours a month. This life-saving work is everything. But Jesus, guys, gave us bad info, and there is zero effort to get this fixed, and we are left to figure it out on our own. Jesus sends his apology for believing old light, but he isn't sending anyone back to you to correct the error and update you. Look, the angels are a bit busy these days. Sorry. It's just undeniable stuff. And so there you have it. In a long-winded diatribe, the three things, and I was thinking a lot about them this week as I travel, that really helped me find the exit door. And the reason was because I was drawn to the idea that someone cared. In wrapping this up, I started by asking what drew you to Jesus' organization. And again, for me, it was clearly the facade that the governing body cared, community. We were cared for. I took a minute, I went back, and I wanted to look in the dictionary what the definition of care is. One dictionary said this. It said the provision of what is necessary for the health, welfare, maintenance, and protection of someone or something. If the governing body cares for its estimated 8 million publishers, as well as the rest of the planet they're here to save, they really, really have a funny way of showing it. I can read the good book myself and see the King of Jehovah's Witnesses giving sight to the blind, touching a leper, resurrecting kids, and being kind even to us apostates. But that same king and his guys in 2023 has a secret pedophile database they don't want to share. People are dying due to him changing his mind on blood. Why? We don't know why. The same blood he created and gave us. And he seems, how do I say this, a little unstable on his instructions for how we should navigate life and serve him on our way to paradise. I personally, and I think I'm in pretty good company, I'm not alone, I would just like to know if he cares. And based on what we are told, we get that answer from his 9 guys in New York. I'm reminded of Psalm 69:20 where it says, quote, "Reproach has broken my heart, and the wound is incurable." I was hoping for sympathy, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. Does the governing body care about Jehovah's Witnesses based on what I shared? I got nothing. Thanks for listening in this week. I really, truly appreciate it, each and every one of you. Wherever you may be well.